I'd like to take another quick poll. Hands up if you've had a Pfizer vaccine at any point for COVID going on. At least one Pfizer vaccine. Who's had at least one Pfizer vaccine? So that helps me introduce our next speaker, who's very pleased, of course, to see all of your hands. It's Dr. Ramin Darvari, who's leading the mRNA LNP product development program at Pfizer. And Pfizer, by the way, thanks to Pfizer for being one of the sponsors of Clinim.
All right. Thank you so much, Terry, for the kind introduction. And also thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on blank LNPs and their usefulness in understanding of what's happening with these modalities and take a closer look. So with that said, and I'm fully aware that we are running late and I'm between you and lunch, so I'll try to make it short and sweet. So blank LNPs, they have a lot in common with their mRNA-loaded relatives, as long as they've made through the same process parameters and also with the same composition of the components. So as long as we have that, and composition of the components, of course, except for the RNA. So in the next two slides, I'm going to take you basically through two effects. One is how blank LNPs, they help us to understand the internal interactions and the molecular dynamics within the within the LNP. And also trying to, and after that, I'll cover how blank LNPs will help us understanding the LNP's interactions on the outside with each other. So with that said, starting from blank LNPs and the molecular packing without the concept of N-to-P ratio. Well, most of you know about the N-to-P ratio. It's a way of saying how many molecules of the cationic lipid should be in the formulation based on the number of molecules or the number of phosphate groups on the backbone of the RNA. Now, if I have to give an example of that for the two COVID vaccines available commercialized, it's a 6-to-1, which means every phosphate, for every phosphate in the backbone of the RNA used, you have 6 molecules of the cationic lipid in the formulation. So if you just assume that there's a 1-to-1 interaction of one cationic lipid with one phosphate, which sterically actually probably is not true, it's less than that, you can imagine then you have 5 free cationic lipids that they are not actually interacting with the RNA at all during the condensation and the final conformation of the LNP itself. So when you look at that, that should be essentially the same way as the blank LNPs come together and form. You can actually detect a tad of smaller size because there's no payload, but that also actually brings up a topic of why we call it blank LNPs rather than empty. We don't have time to cover that now, but maybe during the QA. But that's essentially important to understand how, or why, not how, but why, having basically understanding from blank LNPs could apply and help us understanding the behavior of the loaded LNPs with RNA and how it's going to be helpful basically in terms of how we are imagining essentially how these things come together. Now, by show of hand, how many of you think that the picture on the left-hand side is a blank LNP? So what do you think the right-hand side is, blank or? That's the point, actually. So unfortunately, I cannot tell you which one is which because I had an agreement with our lawyers not to put anything more, not to say anything more, but to be able to show you the pictures, actually. But the point here is, if you look at those budding structures and looking at some of the, actually the anatomy of the particles, you see there are a lot of similarities which originally we attributed that to mRNA behavior within the LNP. But if you compare these, they are pretty much, there are aspects of this that we can actually further investigate. And also, one of the biggest factors here is the tools available to us. And yesterday, I think Dan mentioned something about the two COVID vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer. There were some cutting corners happened. That's one perspective. One perspective is for those in the trenches. We just did whatever we could do with the tools available, and understanding that there are more tools also needed for the future products that's going to come out. So for many of you in academia, actually, some of those tools are analytic tools that needs to be actually developed. And sometimes we do our best in the industry to do that, but some of those are so early that definitely an academic intervention is needed. So with that said, next is how we learn more about the interactions of the LNPs based on the blank LNPs. Now, the crowding, the molecular crowding concept, it's been around for years. And this, especially for those of you who are familiar with protein formulation, that is well understood and well used, basically, and applied. Now, for the lack of a better terminology, we try to understand the colloidal crowding because, again, LNPs, they are not molecules, they are modalities. So we try to understand, basically, if the colloidal crowding also could be some tools that can be used for formulation of LNPs, especially if you are reducing the concentration of the LNPs in the formulation. Now, the concept is all about, as you're reducing the concentration, and we usually basically refer to a concentration based on mRNA, but with the understanding of the same composition of the LNPs, you have, as you're reducing the concentration of RNA, you're reducing actually the number of LNPs in your formulation. So as we are reducing that, we started seeing actually some consequences which were very similar to what we see also with protein formulations. And that was essentially behaviors that we weren't expecting, one being a decrease in encapsulation efficiency and also an increase in size and size distribution. So knowing the formulations on the protein side, we said, okay, does it have to do with the crowding effect? Not molecular crowding, but colloidal crowding. So with that said, we started adding making some blank LNPs, again, with the same methods that we use to make the loaded LNPs. And we increased the concentration of LNPs in the formulation, keeping the same concentration of RNA intact. And with that, what you do here is the local N to P ratio for the blank LNP, for the loaded LNPs remains the same, but the global lipid content goes up while you are pretty much bringing back the total LNP concentration back to the original that it used to be before the dilution. So with that said, just showing you a little bit about how it worked, and the real problem was during the stressing the particles. And stressing in this example for this presentation has to do with freeze-thaw cycles and also lyophilization. So those were some of the problems. We can use myself as an old-fashioned pointer here to essentially orient you here. So to your left, you have the first box here. You see 5 cycles of freeze-thaw. And those 5 cycles repeats themselves basically at different concentration of RNA while we are diluting actually the most concentrated version with the medium that is in. So there's no addition of blank LMPs at this point. So when you have that, as you see at 0.5 mg per ml of mRNA concentration, no problem. 0.1 is also okay. You start seeing some effects basically as soon as you get to the 0.01, and then everything goes down as soon as you hit basically 10 times less than that. Now, going to the other side, here we have a similar situation except for the fact that instead of just diluting with the medium itself, we are diluting with equivalent number of LMPs that would have been a 0.5 or 0.1 in 2 different media, actually. So the green here shows you basically what you see and as an equivalent for a 0.5 mg per ml, while we are keeping actually the RNA concentration low or intact as it was. And then the orange shows you bringing basically the number of particles to a 0.1 mg per ml RNA equivalent. So, and you see basically pretty much everything goes back to normal. So essentially it shows you and this is actually, I should mention, it's based on the percent encapsulation. So that was the biggest problem that we had with dilution of the LMPs. Now, there's a blip basically there that is just basically an analytical blip that later on we took care of, but it didn't make it to the slides. However, again, it proved the concept that it is actually a colloidal crowding effect, and that's how it happens. Now, next is the same thing, freeze-thaw, same scheme, except that now we are looking at the Z-average. And again, the story is reversed now. As you're diluting the material, you are going higher on the Z-average. And as soon as you start adding the blank LMPs, it goes back to normal. Again, proving the fact that you have that crowding effect playing out here. Similar for what you have on the PDI. Nothing really different here. The second round of stressing these particles was essentially lyophilization. And similar effect, you see here different types of, different conditions for lyophilization and different reconstitution methods, which is not important to make the point here, but the point is a different type of stress also created a similar problem, and it was remedied by adding blank LMPs. Here, we are talking about encapsulation. Here, we are talking about the Z-average, and this is about the PDI. So just finishing by, in summary, blank LMPs are valuable tools, don't forget them, in studying the dynamics of, or the molecular dynamics of the lipid components within the LMP. There are tools needed still to understand basically the structural comparison between blank and mRNA-loaded LMPs, and those needs to be developed still. Some of these we are trying to develop, and some falls on some of you to do that. And blank LMPs has potential options to mitigate some undesirable impact of freeze-thaw cycling and lyophilization processes, as I showed you, and probably some other stresses that we have not looked at yet. And with that, thank you for your attention, and thanks to a lot of folks that actually made this data happen.